Just got licensed. So signing on a broker.
All right, we're gonna get going here, guys. We got more people joining on Zoom, which is a good thing. So today's class is about reading the PR and what you need to know in terms of escrow and title and things. So we have experts here that are gonna do it, which is not me. So so teaching the class today, and I'll go get the sign-in sheet. For you guys that are on Zoom, if you will just throw into the
link so I can have it here so I can see if people will ask questions via chat.
I'll have to send it to you.
You're like,
I don't know
I
off
have
the top
it.
of my head.
I have it. I'll flip it.
Yeah, okay. So if you guys that are on Zoom though, if you'll just put first and last name in your office, I don't need license numbers. We're working on getting this approved for CE and it's pretty much there, but it's not, we don't have the go ahead,
have
right,
the
Sam?
official.
Yeah. So anyway, so who will be teaching the class today is Crystal with North Star, who also at one point worked at All Valley, I'm assuming, right?
No.
No, you never did?
Fidelity National Title.
Oh, that's true. I guess you wouldn't have. Anyway, she did it in California for any of the California people that are on. So, and then we've also got Sam Bell, who is our president of the Everest group. So he oversees all of the operations within the Everest system and also happens to be an attorney. So don't hold that against him.
And the title officer.
And the title officer. So, all right. So I'm going to turn it over to them. For you guys that are here, I'm going to go get the sign-in sheet and I'll bring it back up for you guys. But again, for everybody on Zoom, put in your first and last name and office in the chat box so that we have a record. And
Awesome.
you taking over?
Yeah.
All right. I'll be right back.
Thanks, Russ.
Yep.
All right, so I'm Crystal. I'm one of the escrow officers at North Star Title. And as Russ said, Sam is our lovely title officer / lawyer. So he's very well versed in the title aspect of title of the whole transaction. So we're gonna go over what title is, what escrow is, and how to read a PR.
Trying to get this to work.
Technical difficulties.
All right, here we go. All right.
So the course overview, so like I said, we're gonna go over parts of PR, what is escrow, what is title insurance, different types of policies, reviewing the preliminary title report, and then top 10 common title issues. And then of course, at the end, we'll answer your questions if you have any.
All right, so let's talk about just a quick overview of the title report. There's 3 parts. You have Schedule A, Schedule B1, and Schedule B2. Schedule A is the who, what. Oh, that was funny. I thought that was coming through the speaker. So Schedule A is the who, what, and where of the policy. Schedule B1 are the requirements to the conditions to close, right? So I think as a real estate agent, we typically think of conditions to close as being, okay, we tick the due diligence box, we tick the financing box, you know, the appraisal box, we're ready to close. Well, in the title world, Schedule B1 are the instructions to the title officer and the escrow officer on what needs to happen before they can close and issue a title insurance policy. Okay, and then Schedule B2 is what are known as exceptions from coverage. We'll get really in the weeds on that in a minute.
Okay, so escrow, we handle a lot of moving parts for you guys. So we're kind of like the middleman of the entire transaction. So we hold everybody accountable, your sellers, buyers, agents, lenders. A part of our job, aside from holding everybody accountable, is also clearing title, collecting all the information from your clients to represent the seller. We're going to ask you guys or your clients for an information sheet to be able to collect information for payoff, HOA. We coordinate with the HOA. We make sure that they're paid. We contact the old lender, collect the payoffs, do all that clearing stuff. So that way, when the final title policy is issued, everything is clear and pretty and ready for your new buyer.
And the bank gives you money.
Yeah, the bank gives us money. Yeah. And what is escrow? So like I said, we're a neutral third party. So we're not a part of any of the contractual aspect at all. You guys do all the negotiation and we follow your direction. So it's super, super important for you as agents to make sure that your addendums are clear and all sent over to us. Because if we don't have an addendum, we can't do our job efficiently. So we tend to all the details of opening, maintaining, and closing of a real estate transaction. So we obviously open the file, we get the title report ordered, we clear title, we make sure that everything is collected on both sides. So whether we have the buyer or the seller, or we're working to split title, we make sure everyone is collecting the right information. And then we take care of the closing process. So we're there with your clients, that final aspect of the transaction, signing those documents and helping them close on their home. Receives and disperses funds, that's another really important aspect. What's really great about, so now we offer at North Star, we have this company that is a third party called PCN. They guarantee every single wire that leaves our bank and that comes in. So it's an awesome security, especially because of all the wire fraud that's out. So that is a perk that we have at North Star Title. Then we do all the curative work to ensure clearing title.
Right. So the big question, the question of the day is, what is title insurance anyway? Other than just an additional closing cost. Title insurance is really just, it's an insurance policy, okay? And it protects the property rights. And like, so if you think of, insuring your car, you buy a car, you want to insure your car in case you crash your car, somebody crashes into your car. This is going to protect a much larger investment, unless, I don't know, maybe you have a $100,000 condo and a $300,000 Ferrari out front. But typically there's a much larger investment, and it's one of the biggest investments that your clients will make in their lives. And so this is a policy that protects their property rights, meaning, when they buy that property, they know that there will be insurance backing it in case somebody comes to them and says, hey, you don't actually own that property, I own that property. That's an example, right? And then they can look back to their insurance policy and say, okay, what's going on? The insurance company would then kick in to defend them, to protect them, and then to pay out if something was wrong with their actual ownership and property rights in that property, okay? It protects, your client protects you against covered title defects. We'll get into those a lot more a little later, but on occasion there may be a missing deed in the chain of title. I'll just give you an example. When I was practicing law, I had a client who died. Well, no, my client didn't die. I represented the beneficiaries of the trust, right? So mom, who's owned the property, the kids grew up in the house, she passes the beneficiary. So the kids go, okay, let's sell the house. It's time, we've cleaned out the house. It's time to sell the house. And as they went to sell, they found out that mom never actually was on title to the house. She had the house. She thought she was on title to the house. There were some deeds that looked like she might have been on title to the house, but if you went to the title records, the last deed was to these kids' grandparents in the 60s, right? And so we were hired to come in and clean that up so that mom actually owned the house, so that the house could then be in the trust so that these beneficiaries could take the house, right? So it happens, and actually it happens probably more than people think. I think a lot of us think, oh, well, it's title, right? Like it's really clear, and we just have to run to the county recorder, and we just look, and it's going to tell us who's on it, and it's always right, except for it's not always right.
Well, and sometimes too, like on the escrow side, we could record a deed and the county accepts it, but then they can turn around and reject it and send the title company a rejection letter and a correction. So that's also something too. People think, oh, my wife is on title, but really that deed never took effect. Yeah. So it's really important. That's another thing about having like a really strong title company behind you, whether you use North Star or All Valley. That's important because that deed is the transfer deed and it has to be done correctly, or like you're saying, or in the future, you're not going to be the owner of the house.
So title insurance protects you against those types of issues. It protects against past problems and future claims, right? So a past problem would be like what we just described, the deed. There was a problem with the deed, or something didn't happen properly, so it's not owned the way we think it's owned. And future claims would be somebody showing up on your doorstep. Let's say you in that scenario where the mother had died thinking she owned the house. Let's say she deeded the house to someone else, right? Let's say she deeded it to me. Said, hey, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to quit claim deed my house to you. Then I think I own it, right? She doesn't tell her kids. She passes. The kids go, okay, it's time to sell mom's house. They go, okay, we're here to sell mom's house. And suddenly I knock on the door when I see the sign in the yard, say, what are you doing? This is my house. They go, what do you mean it's your house? And I show them the deed. I go, I have a deed right here, signed by your mom 2 weeks ago, right? So that would be a future claim that title insurance would protect against. All right. So there's two types of policies. There's a lender's policy or loan policy, and that protects the lender, right? And it's valid for the life of the loan. If you're borrowing money, or if your client is borrowing money, unless it's from a private party, if it's a government product, if it's any conventional type loan, any kind of bank, they're going to require that your client get a lender's policy to protect their collateral, right? And so that's going to be a loan policy or a lender's policy. The other policy is the owner policy, and that's the policy that protects the owner and their heirs, and it's for the life that they own the property or one of their heirs own the property. So it's effective for a very long time. So these are the two policies. If you're working with cash buyers, you're only going to usually see an owner's policy. If you're working with buyers who are getting loans, you're going to see these two. So when your clients are sitting with you and you're going through, the costs and of buying the home, the closing costs, and they're going to go, well, what is this stuff? You should be able to go, okay, lender's policy, check. If you're going to borrow, you got to get one. That it could be that simple of an explanation, right? The lender's going to require it. Owner's policy, you want one because it's going to protect you and your heirs for as long as you or them own the property. And there are times when it comes up. I mean, if you look at the premium, so let's just talk about that for a minute. When you're going to buy a house, another $1,000 can feel like a lot, especially if you're stretched to just buy the house, right? But when you're buying a $1,000 policy to cover $300,000 forever, as far as you're concerned, that's a very cheap premium, especially if you look like health insurance could be $1,000 a month, right? Auto insurance, well, if you're me and you have 2 teenage boys, it's $1,000 a month, right? And so, $1,000 for the next 100 years seems like a steal, right? And so it's wise to do that, and you should be recommending it, not just because the insurance companies want to make money, because it will protect your client.
And then in California, obviously you have one title company in California, so you'll see both policies on your one title company will issue both title policies. In Utah, seller's title company will issue owner's policy, and your buyer's title company will issue the lender's policy.
Yeah.
So.
All right, going on. So let's talk about reviewing the preliminary title report, which is why you guys are all sitting here going, holy cow, I did not come to learn about what an escrow company. I did not come to learn about title policies. The reason we go through that is I think, at least when I had my license back in the late 90s, well, let's be honest, until I was an attorney working with title companies, title was the most mysterious part of the whole process, right? I knew what the lender did. I knew what the real estate agent did. Well, everybody talked about title, and all I knew is you show up there and you sign papers, right? It was the most mysterious piece. I wasn't quite sure what the escrow officer was doing. I wasn't quite sure what title policies were. So we give that overview just to help you understand, have a little more knowledge than what I had when I was sitting in your shoes as an agent. And then, then you can, of course, talk to your clients. So let's talk about the actual title report. Okay, so, and Crystal's talking about California. I'm going to talk in California because I think we have some of our California agents on via Zoom. So in Utah, in the Rep C, Section 7, Seller's Disclosures. Under Section 7, the seller is required to provide a preliminary title report to the buyer as part of their disclosures, right? California, also, the seller is required, and I blank on, there's a few more paragraphs and pages in the California, it's called the RPA, than there are in Utah's Rep Cs, but the seller is also required in California to provide to the buyer a copy of a preliminary title report. Now you're going to get this, and as an agent, typically it goes from agent to agent, and then you hand it off to the client. In California, it goes from escrow officer to agents who then hand it off. client's going to look at it and go, what is this, right? I mean, you're the expert. You know all things related to real estate ever. You know all about lending underwriting guidelines, right? Because they don't call the lender underwriter and go, hey, what's the deal with it? They call you and go, oh, what does this mean? Should I pay off this credit card? Should I not? They're going to look at this and go, easements, what's an easement? I don't know what that is. You know what that is because you're the expert, right? And so it's good to know what each part of this is so that you can walk your client through it. You know, buyers, you may want to walk your sellers through it, and we'll get into the details of what. So there's, again, 3 parts, A, B1, B2. Okay, we're going to look at an actual title report. This is a real deal where it was issued. So this is Schedule A. I told you Schedule A is the who, what, and where. Okay, so if you look at this, the number 1 is the effective date of the commitment. Now, this is not the title insurance policy. This is just an offer, basically a written offer from the title insurance company to the buyer and to the lender of what they will provide. Okay, so here you have, so number 1 is the effective date of the offer. Number 2 is the policy or policies that they're going to write. So here you have 2A is the owner's policy. Okay, they're going to write the owner's policy. The amount of the owner's policy is going to be the amount of the purchase price. And then there's your premium, right? So they're going to say that 2802 is something you're going to look at and go, okay, that's going to be a closing cost, right? If we buy for $800,000, there's going to be a $2,800 title insurance premium that has to be paid. The next piece down here on 2B, that's the lender's policy. Now here, there's not one-sided. Sometimes on the PR, they won't give you that premium because they're not sure if it's a cash deal or something that requires a loan policy, okay? So that may be filled in. If you know, if you're looking at this with your client, if you're with your buyer and you're looking at this, you go, okay, well, there's gonna be a $800,000 purchase, $2,800 premium for the owner's policy. You know, maybe the seller's gonna pick that up. Loan policy. Well, I know you're getting a loan, but there's not a loan policy here. It's okay to call in, say, hey, title company, I need to get a quote on what that loan policy premium is going to be. I'm trying to help my buyer understand closing costs, right? And they can give it. The question back is going to be how much, because they insure the amount of the loan, right?
And also when you are under contract and all these things start changing, so title will get a lender request and then we'll update the amount. You should be getting those updated PRs as things change. So the purchase price change, you'll get an update. So this page will change. The lender loan amount changes, this will also change, and you should be getting those updates. So if you send out an addendum and you're not getting that update, make sure to ask for it and title will send it over to you.
Make sure you give title a copy so
Yes,
they know.
That too.
Okay, number 3 is the type of estate or interest. In residential real estate, it's usually going to say fee simple, right? If you're getting into like high-end leasing, they do issue title policies for tenants. You know, there are other things, there are other products available, but just, I know most of us are residential. We're going to stick with, you're going to see fee simple there. And what that means is somebody's giving away all interest in that property, right? So it's going to be, you know, a fee simple interest that's transferred. Number 4, it's going to, this tells you who owns the property now, right? This one's not very good. It just says fee title owner, but a lot of time, if you're on the seller side or if you're on the buyer side, you should see the seller's name there. Now, that's a red flag. If you're, this is probably the first area that if I'm sitting in your shoes with a client, you know, if I'm sitting with a buyer and we know that we went under contract with Sam, the seller, and I don't see Sam, the seller name in number 4, red flag, right? Because wait, am I under contract with the owner of this property? That's my first question, right? So number 4 is the first area you really ought to pay attention to because that could be a red flag thing. Now, if it says Sam the seller, you go, okay, we're good. We know exactly what's going on. We can move on. 5 is the where, right? This is the property that's going under contract. And it usually says Exhibit A. You know, for those of you who've looked at legal descriptions, they can be as simple as Unit 1 in Century 21 subdivision, or they could be a meets and bounds description where they said beginning at a point that's da, 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 and then going this many feet and then turning and then going this many feet. And they could be really long and complicated. It's usually Exhibit A, which would be on the next page. Okay, so again, if you're looking at it, closing costs, helping you understand the closing costs for your clients are number 2, and then number 4, make sure it's the right name that you have on the Rep C or the RPA.
And ask questions. Ask title.
questions.
Why is it not my seller? It could be, the examples we were giving earlier, that a deed wasn't accepted by the county, and so that transfer never happened. Title is there to help you figure out how to get that fixed. I even had somebody recently that thought he was a successor trustee of a trust. And so he was the seller on the contract, but that transfer of the successor trustee never happened because someone had to step down before him. So that's like another example. So then title's there to help you. Okay, here's how you clean this up. Let's get this going. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And the sooner the better in the transaction.
Sooner the better. Yes.
Please do not wait until the day before closing, the week before closing,
Yes.
unless it's only a 1-week cash deal. Then well, it is what it is. But the sooner, that's a great point.
Yes.
The sooner, the better.
Yep.
Sometimes it takes time, especially if you're dealing with a trust
Yes.
or an estate. It can take some time.
And your title company, when they send out PRs, so PRs typically are 48, 72 hours from opening up escrow. When they send it out, they should be breaking it down for you in an email. And if there's an issue, like, hey, I noticed on your agenda or in your rep salesperson signing, they should bring that to your attention. So that way you guys can talk about it then. 72 hours in the transaction to start taking care of it.
Absolutely.
I have a question right now. If I
Yeah,
may.
no, I was just gonna say, questions
Okay.
before we
Right.
move on past Schedule A.
Well, if it's a preliminary title report,
Yes,
is PR short for preliminary report?
yes.
I've always wondered what the
No,
PR
no,
stands for.
me
because there's
too,
no T in
Because I
there.
think that's a real estate
I
agent
mean, it's a-
abbreviation,
Yeah, so PR is in Utah, and then in California, there's called a prelim.
a prelim, yeah, prelim,
So-
PR.
Right.
It should be PTR.
And I always call
I
it
mean,
title report.
Yeah,
So
title, you'll see
in the
title.
in the legal
commitment.
world, they're like, hey, did you get a title report? And in Utah, you're saying PR. In California, they're saying prelim.
Yep.
And if you're in the title industry, they're saying commitment for title insurance. I mean, we got all kinds of terms flying around. Well, that's a great question. Anybody on Zoom? You guys are always welcome to unmute and ask questions. Do you have any questions, any other questions before we move on from Schedule A? All right. Here we go, Schedule B, Part 1. So I told you at the beginning, Schedule B, Part 1 are instructions to the title officer and the escrow officer on what the conditions are for this transaction to close. So again, I mentioned in real estate agent world, we typically think of due diligence and disclosures and appraisal and finance deadlines as the things that are conditions to close. In the title world, this holds all the conditions to close, right? And typically it's things like, okay, you got to have a deed. You know, the seller has to sign a deed in fee simple, if that's what we're insuring, to the buyer, right? So that's usually a condition. Keep hitting buttons. I don't know if things are happening. That's usually a condition if there's a loan, right? Making sure things are signed before, like the deed of trust and the promissory note are signed. So these are really instructions to the title company. From a real estate agent's side, this is another area where it will say, and this one doesn't have names in it, but it will say deed from Sam the seller to, Joe the buyer. Now you can check names there and just double check. That's probably the only area that I would really worry about, unless there are weird conditions. And if there are, the escrow officer will reach out to you and say, hey, there's some weird conditions here. A lot of this stuff is usually just boilerplate, but there might be a weird condition but just skim this and go, okay, where are the names? Oh, I see the names. Is that the seller and is that my buyer? Deed looks good. I'm going to pause just for a minute, talk about names. If you're working with an investor and they want the deed they want to take title in the name of their investment company, Sam's Investments LLC, that's a good place to look at that. Say, okay, is the deed going to the right buyer, right? It's not Sam that's buying it, it's Sam's company that's buying it. Is the company name in there? So just check the names on B1 and then know that the escrow officer is going to reach out to you if there's weird conditions that you need to worry about.
And then know that No, though, if it isn't an LLC or a trust, so if you're a buyer, even if it's a buyer or a seller, one of the conditions can be for escrow to collect the incorporation docs or the trust docs. So that's something for you guys to also, if you want to be ahead of the game, collect those documents already from your client and send those off to escrow so we have those, because that will be something that will compound you for.
Yes.
Yes.
Is this the section where judgments will be listed?
No, we're
Yeah.
gonna get to that.
Okay.
That's B2.
Next one.
That's the next one. And one
This
more
one's
comment
super
on
pretty.
companies and trusts. I know you all anxiously await the Tuesday tips from Rob and then read it and memorize it. A couple weeks ago, Rob sent out a Tuesday tip that talked about the proper way for companies and trusts to sign. And the reason Rob sent that out is we received a contract where the signature of the buyer was a company. It wasn't Sam as manager of Sam's Investments LLC. It was Sam's Investments LLC. Somebody had signed Sam's Investments LLC as if that's the signature of a buyer. Now, I love formations of companies. I did a lot of corporate work when I was practicing law. There's a chance that some weird corporate lawyer has named his kid Sam's Investments LLC, Bell, right? But it's unlikely. So there has to be a human that signs for a company. So, just so you guys, just to raise that, because again, it is starting to happen more and more. I think people are like, oh, I have to sign it that way to hide behind the corporate shield, or I have to sign that way, because it's a trust. There's always a human that signs on behalf of a legal entity, right? So just a reminder. Okay. All right, here's the fun part, Schedule B2. There are three main parts that I look at when I'm looking at Schedule B2, right? The first part is going to be boilerplate stuff. And they usually in a normal contract, boilerplate stuff usually is at the end. In Schedule B2 of the title insurance, it's at the front. Okay, so there's boilerplate stuff that's not really going to change. Then you're going to have the things that affect property rights, like easements or conditions, covenants, and CC&Rs, right? Inclusion into like special service districts, stuff like that. So that's usually the second piece, and we'll go through this and look at it all together and look for buzzwords. But the second piece is going to be stuff that affects your property rights, is not going to go away at closing, right? Easements don't go away, they stay. And then the last part is going to be the things that the escrow officer and the title company are going to clear prior to close. Things like judgments and liens, deeds of trust, things like that. And that's usually the third piece. So let's run through and look at this. And we're going to talk about it from both the listing agent's perspective and the buyer's agent's perspective. Okay, so here's this again. This is a real title report. This Schedule B Part 2, if it's anything more than 2 pages, there's a lot going on. This has like 8 or 9 pages to it. Okay.
Don't be alarmed. This is right.
We picked out the messiest one so that we had everything under the sun to look at together. Okay. So here we go. First page at the beginning, 1 through 7. This is your boilerplate stuff, right? And this is just the stuff that's always going to be there. I personally have stopped reading it a long time ago because I know it's all going to be there, right? But basically it says, hey, so let me back up. B2, as in all title policies, there are exclusions and exceptions, right? Yeah, we'll insure your car, unless it's destroyed in an act of terror. So if Al-Qaeda flies an airplane into your car, we're not buying you a new car. Sorry, that's an act of terror, right? But if you just crash it on the freeway, we'll buy you a new car, right? So there's always exceptions and exclusions. These are the exceptions and exclusions to your buyer's title policy, right? And so they're going to say things that are things that are out of their control. One thing to really look at, and I think it's on the next page, so I'll save it till we get there. But down here, as part of the boilerplate stuff, and it starts in number 8, taxes. This will disclose property taxes. You want to look at this as a listing agent and ask yourself, okay, seller's net. When I was at my listing presentation, I sat down, I told you, you're gonna have $400,000 in cash at the end of this deal. After you pay me and pay closing costs, all this, you're gonna have 400,000. Now I get this and I start looking at it and I go, well, will you? Now in this case, they have delinquent property taxes from 2020, 2019, 2018, 2016, right? And it'll say an amount. So here, there's $20,000 due from 19, 7,400 from 18, right? So on the listing side, you look at that and you need to have a conversation with your seller. Hey, guess what? You didn't pay property taxes.
And
So-
keep in mind too,
Plus
these are
penalties
interest.
and interest.
Plus penalties
Just
and
about to
interest.
say that. So
Yeah.
these are
Looking at the
interest
word.
accruing. So your escrow company will provide you with the payoff through close of escrow, so it's gonna be even more
Yeah.
than what the PR is listed at, so.
And if you dive down into 8, you'll not only see property taxes, but they've also failed to pay for a special service district, which is garbage and recycling. Okay, so they haven't paid those bills either. So, okay, now I'm looking at my seller going, okay, it was 400, now it's 300, now it's 200, right? It's going down, 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 down. So it's something to talk to your seller about. On the buyer's side, just know there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that's going to get cleaned up. Did you have a question? You're
Yeah,
switching. Okay.
on property taxes.
Yeah.
Are sometimes the sellers surprised that they didn't get paid because they're supposed to be paid by
Yeah, through escrow in their
So-
mortgage.
So they're like, what?
Well, so typically when you run into a situation, someone's just avoiding paying taxes.
Someone probably owns their house.
So
Or
it's
it's
not been the escrow's fault.
No, the escrow, the escrow account that you're talking about, that's the lender's
Yeah.
responsibility for paying it out. So escrow actually never handles it, it's just a
Yeah.
part of it. No, it is not their fault.
Interesting.
So, but on the assessments though too, so just clarification for those in California, utility assessments are not recorded again, as a lien on the property, but it is here in Utah. So when we call in to the city to collect those figures, you'll see those on your closing documents as well. But like I said, in California, you don't have that, you'll just have the property, the property taxes there, so. But yeah, it's not fun, they're just avoiding it, typically is what I find.
So going on to the next, this is, again, we're still in boilerplate, right? These guys had a lot of stuff. Number 9, special improvement district, right? So this is telling you the only reason utilities, garbage and recycling showing up is because they're part of a special service district that allows those charges to be charged. Now, if I'm on the buyer side and I see a special service district, I'm going to just point out, hey, there's going to be something extra. You might, I think we all expect property taxes. If you're buying in an HOA, you're going to expect HOA assessments. But then there are all these other things called special service districts. These are typically not escrowed for by the lender, so they would get a bill and they would need to pay the bill. And if they don't pay the bill, then it's a lien, right? And it can affect
And I
their
have
ownership.
seen, in rental situations for like utilities, so the renter is responsible for paying the utilities. And so the owner of the home, when they go to sell it, have no idea that their renter has not paid the bill. So, because that was part of their lease agreement. So that's something where that comes up, so then the seller would have to take that up with their previous renters or figure that out outside of escrow. But in regards to the assessments, it's really the only time I see that, or unless they're defaulting in their home, so.
Yeah. So as we come down this property, this Schedule B Part 2, we come down to 11, and that's kind of the end of the boilerplate. We're about to transition into the stuff that's going to stay with your property and affect your property rights stuff, right? But if you look, there's mineral rights and then there's water rights, okay? Now, if your client is buying to mine and they really care about the mineral rights and they want those protected, or the water rights, and water is a huge thing in Utah and California, it doesn't matter. Water is a big thing. It's more expensive than gold in a lot of cases. If there are water rights transferring, and not water shares, okay? Water shares are different than water rights. Water shares are shares in a company that owns water rights. Water rights are actually, I own the water in that creek or in that river or in that lake. You're going to want to reach out to your escrow officer and say, hey, we are buying water rights with this, so that they can, as with, again, insurance policies, there's always upsells, right? There's, oh, you want a little extra coverage here, you want a little extra coverage there. You can buy that, which will remove this and insure over it, but it's a special circumstance. It's not just regular, right? Which is, again, in residential, I'd be really shocked if somebody was like, I'm the old prospector and I want a mine under my house, and I really care about that. But you will run into water rights from time to time. Okay, so beginning with 12 and moving down, we're getting into the things. So the second big category, so boilerplate's done. The second big category is stuff that affects the property that doesn't go away at closing, right? So if you look at 12, rights of way for roads, ditches, canals, utility lines, just kind of a coverall that we're not going to insure when the power company comes onto your property and says, hey, we've got to drive our truck to the back corner to fix the power line, when we know that there's a 10-foot utility easement that goes right along there, right? They're not going to insure that and go, oh, that's horrific. Yes, let us write you a check because the power company did that, right? They're not going to insure for that. Now, 13, this is something I think buyers and sellers, agents, you need to think about this stuff. And what it is boundary disputes, boundary line issues, okay? A lot of people, I'm going to go back to when I practiced law, I would get a lot of calls with cases related to boundary line issues. And here's what's scary. We'll look at a map at the end, but we're here at Union Park on the 6th floor. If you look out the windows, you can see a lot of Salt Lake Valley. I promise you that almost everything we see out the windows, the boundary lines are off. The boundary lines are off. And guess who knows that? The insurance actuary who decided what exceptions should be. We're not going to insure against boundary line issues and discrepancies, right? Because they know that staying on the 6th floor, looking out across the valley, most of that stuff is off. So insurance is like the house. It's like the casino, right? The house always wants to win. They're not going to bet on that. So just be aware that if there is a boundary issue, it's not insured unless they get a survey, an ALTA survey done, right? And then they'll insure a boundary issue.
Who's they and when would they need to do the survey?
They are the buyer. The survey should be done during due diligence.
Okay, so if the survey is done during due diligence and it comes up that the boundary lines, that there's a discrepancy in the due diligence.
Get it to your escrow officer and make sure they get that included as an insurable issue in the title insurance policy. Okay.
So you don't go back to the seller and their neighbor and say, move the fence.
You can.
Boundary issue.
Right. You can absolutely do that. And you may want to do both depending on what's going on. Now, surveys are not, buyers don't do a lot of due diligence. Let's be honest. When it comes to residential, buyers are just so excited about two-tone paint, granite countertops, and it smells like fresh cookies, and our kids would love it here. And it has you can't say master bedroom anymore, I guess, but has that.
Owner's retreat.
The owner's retreat.
Master bedroom.
There was a whole thing in the Texas Association of Realtors around Black Lives Matter that said master bedroom and master bathroom are no longer politically
So
correct.
actually see when you go into new builds, they
There's
put
title
owner's retreat
reports
now.
and PC language in
Oh my
selling.
goodness. That's why they don't say it on HGTV anymore.
Yeah.
That is why they don't say it on
Yeah.
HGTV. There is no such thing as a
And
master
builders won't
suite,
listen
master
that way
bedroom.
either.
Yeah, so the owner's retreat. Anyway, they get so it's an emotional purchase, and they forget that there could be all kinds of things that they may not like in the future. This happens to be this was the purchase of a development, so it was a little more business like, where surveys are typically done to make sure you know what you're getting and can build what you want to build, those types of things. But a survey is not a bad idea. I've owned rental properties, but personally, I've only owned and lived in 2 houses. And I've had surveys done at both houses after I bought. And in both houses, one was built way back in the early 70s, and the other was built in the early 90s. Both of them, boundary issues up to 3 feet. So it wasn't like a little, like, oh, there's the fence is 6 inches off. It was 3 feet off. And actually, I think I have a picture at the end of my current side yard fence, and you can see where the boundary is. So it's a thing that happens. For the most part, I think we don't really care. Like I looked at, well, my expectation was to own what the fence enclosed, and so I got that, right? But you know, you may have people who go, no, I want more. And I have represented people where we've reclaimed area, and then all the neighbors hate them. So it's weird. Anyway, so just know boundary lines are not part of they're excluded from coverage unless there's a survey. That was a long way to get there. The other things you're looking for, right? So as you're looking at this, and you're going, whoa, blah, 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 legal jargon, legal jargon, legal jargon. This is all so boring. I'm dying a slow death right now because it's so boring. Some of the buzzwords you want to look for are rights of way and easements, right? Because rights of way means somebody can drive or come across your property to access something else, right? And easements are rights to other things. It might be subsurface easements, like for water, gas, those types of things. You want to go, oh, easements, easements, easements. You may want to say, is there a map of this easement? Because this says there is an easement. You could call Crystal and say, hey, escrow officer, can you send me a copy of the easement? And they go, okay, great, here it is. And then you look at it and go, oh my gosh, it's even more boring than the one sentence in the title report. I don't get any of this, right? So these things are worth a picture. I say, you know, see if you can get a picture. And sometimes a map's not available, and you may have to call a surveyor if you really want to get a vision for where it is, because then the surveyor can map it for you. But these are things that are going to stick with the land and really affect your client. Sometimes your client might be on like a flag lot, right? It's a house built behind a house. And the question is, that should always be asked is, you know, I see the driveways there. We can certainly drive on the driveway, but is there a right that will continue to drive on the driveway? Do we have ownership of it? You know, is it a true flag lot? The legal description is big blocks with a little sliver that goes out to the street. Is it there an easement or right of way across that neighbor's property? Before we buy a house behind another house, are we guaranteed access, right? So these are some of the questions you want to ask. I'll use an example. We had a client who bought a house, and they got this, but they're so excited because the house was on a golf course that, you know, they didn't read this. Why? Because it also had granite two-tone paint, right? And their kids could grow up there and be so awesome. And the views were spectacular, and all of that was true. And they got this, and they said, blah, 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 legal jargon, boring, 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 boring. It just so happens that one of these easements described a sewer easement that went right through a third of the house.
Like under the house.
Under the house. I'm sure a lot of you are going, how did that even happen? How in the world did somebody build a house on a sewer easement? I don't know, but it was done. It was done. Now, the question is, what did the future hold for these people? If there's a sewer break under the, not master bedroom, under the, what was it called? Owner's retreat.
Or main
bedroom.
I've heard that.
Under the main bedroom, yes. I need to get back into HDTV, so I learned that. Under the owner's bedroom, you know, what happens? The bulldozers get to just drive through and, you know, tear it out. It's a great question. That's why they called an attorney to figure that all out, right? But they had not paid attention to this beforehand. Had they paid attention, had any buyer ever, since that house was built, paid attention to the rights that are going to affect your ownership, that house may have been unsellable until it was cut down by a third. And then I don't know how you do that, but anyway, so pay attention to this because this is going to affect your clients. Now this, we don't have, I'm going to go, there's a lot on this one. So these rights come down to number 24, right? But there's certain things like there's the creation of a Mill Creek Community Reinvestment Agency. When you see some of these things, you're going to think, okay, that may mean assessments in the future. Anything that talks about agencies or special service districts are going to mean assessments in the future. But again, there's a whole bunch, there's, you know, a bunch of things on this. this is also where you find CC&Rs. So I mentioned this was a development, not an individual house. So you don't see CC&Rs, but right there in that second part is where you're going to see CC&Rs. You're going to see amendments. You might see a notice of reinvestment fee. Okay, so CC&Rs means HOA typically, not always. There are certain communities that have CC&Rs, but no HOA to govern it. In fact, I know of several agents here at Everest that own in such communities. And really the CC&Rs are just there to say, make sure your house is this big, make sure it looks like this, and that's about it, right? There's no ongoing HOA. But if you see that, I would immediately think HOA. And if we haven't been talking to my buyer about the fact they're going to be buying in an HOA, if nothing has triggered us to think HOA, start thinking HOA and ask questions. A notice of reinvestment fee means that there's going to be some sort of fee at the time the property transfers, extra closing costs, because the HOA is going to charge something, and that's called a notice of reinvestment fee. Okay, so those things would show up here in this second section. Yeah.
Okay.
Two quick questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who really legitimately enforces the CC&Rs? Who ultimately does that?
It would be,
The HOA, if
The
there
HOA.
is one.
Yeah, but if there is not one,
if there's not one, it'd be neighbor suing neighbor.
Yeah.
but okay,
Yeah,
and that's it. So the
And that's it.
CC&Rs are part of the case, and that's
yes.
And then
Yeah.
when the PR is sent over to you, you should get a copy of that because it is recorded. So you should be getting a full copy of that so your buyer can read through it.
And under
understand
section
restrictions.
7, in the Utah rep, see the seller's obligated to actually provide all that stuff.
Yeah.
Plus minutes, plus budgets and stuff, yeah.
Second question is, and I know I should know this, but are there occasionally agreements between homeowners, like that house where, let's say, yeah, we're living in back of another house, but what they let us do is sometimes use their RV parking, and they're okay with that because it's convenient and they've agreed to it, and then the new buyer comes along and now that agreement is gone, or
Yes.
maybe it can stay in place.
Yes.
What are those kinds of
So
agreements officially
Those,
called?
that would be called a license.
Okay.
It's a license. So you have easements, which are, I mean, I'm going to dive deep in the legal stuff. And if you don't want to know all the legal deep, dark secrets, just, you can I give you permission to turn off. I'll tell you when to turn back on. So an easement is actually an ownership of one of the rights, right? So if you go back to real estate school, at least when I was in real estate school, they talked about the bundle of rights, and they showed you a bundle of sticks and said, hey, there's all these rights and these are your property rights, okay? So an easement, you've got somebody at some point has actually taken some of those rights out of the bundle and given them to somebody else, right? And there's a deed. You create an easement actually by deeding the easement, right? With a license, you're not giving away a property right. You're just giving permission to someone to use your property or use some of your property rights. Leases are leases, but they're really licenses. I'm giving you a license to live in this apartment under these terms and conditions. I'm not giving you a right to anything in that, just permission to be there.
Yeah.
So that happens actually quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
Where like I love your RV pad example, because that happens where, hey, your neighbor's not using it. They'd rather have it sit there than, glaring in your front of your driveway. So they say, or you go to them and say, hey, can I park my RV or boat or whatever right
My
here on the
daughter's
side of your house?
car, eventually, sometimes, is it okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And they say yes, right?
Yeah.
So if you're working with a buyer and the seller goes, oh, and guess what? Great news. Neighbors next door, they'll let you park your RV in their spot.
Yeah.
Okay. The odds are it's not going to show up here because those types of licenses do not show up on a title report because there's nothing recorded, because it doesn't need to be recorded. But that would be something if the buyer was like, oh, fantastic, I get to park my RV on the neighbor's pad because the neighbor said the seller could do it. That's an opportunity to connect the buyer with the neighbor and make sure that agreement, that arrangement, or that license will continue with your buyer.
Best in writing.
Absolutely, 100%. Best in writing. Best in writing.
I
Thank you.
just had a deal close. It was actually land. And the neighboring property had a storage, like a water storage container on the property. And they tried to convince the new buyer to keep it, like, we've always had it there. And they actually required them to take it down and remove it off the property. So that could be another scenario too.
Yeah.
Just because the current owner says, yay, does not mean that the next one will. So, yeah, that's something else to keep in mind too.
Okay, for anybody who turned off, because I said you could turn off, turn back on. We're gonna move on to the next section. And this is these are trust, like loans, liens, these are financial issues that are happening that are attached to the property. And if we go back to schedule B1, boy, I almost said A. It's like I've never taught this before.
Hey,
Go back
I
to
actually
schedule
have a follow-up question to
Oh, yeah.
what we were last talking about. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Dive in.
So I am actually looking at a family lot up in Heber that I'm looking to purchase, and we were stopped by the neighbor, and he said, oh, well, just so you know, you can't access this lot because I've purchased the entire easement into the lot. Is that actually something that happens? I've requested a PR, so I haven't heard anything yet, but I looked up tax parcel and everything. Is that something you would see publicly on like a plat map or anything?
The answer is yes all around. So,
Okay.
So an easement is, like I said, is ownership of some of the rights to that property. Not all of them, just some, or a few, or one, right? So it's going to show up on a title report. People can transfer easements. So it's possible somebody sold an easement or deeded the easement. But all of that would show up on the title report. If it's not on the title report, it would definitely be on a plat. And if it's neither, then there's no easement. Or
Okay.
it's been unrecorded, and so it's not, boy, I'm gonna dive in. So it's not binding against future purchasers unless they can verify that it was done in good faith. I mean, there's a whole list of legal
Okay.
stuff, but that should be something that shows up. And so just to make sure I followed correctly, there's a lot that's landlocked. There's some land that's landlocked but has an easement, and the guy's saying, I just own the easement, but not the rest of the land, so you can't get into your landlocked land.
Exactly. We think that he has been trying to purchase this property from the family member for years and years. So his game plan was to purchase access so no one else, so, you know, it was useless property.
I would be stunned if he bought, because the owner of the easement would be the owner of the landlocked property, right? That typically goes hand in hand. It's not,
Right.
let's say, me, Sam, I own the landlocked property, but Crystal owns the access to my landlocked property, and it gives me permission, you know, to drive across her easement to get to my land. That would be extremely strange and weird. It'd be weird. Because typically it's the landlocked people that own the easement, so it goes hand in hand, and they have that access. So it'd be really weird for me to own landlocked property and then sell my easement so I can't get back onto my property. I'll be honest, I'm just going to speak very candidly. He sounds like a bully, and I think he's full of it. But
I totally agree. We had the exact same impression that he was just trying to spook us from actually going through with the purchase. So
tell him next time to tell you stories about the hauntings and all that stuff. Maybe that'll scare you away.
right.
The old
Thank
prospect
you.
wanders the streets at night. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? All right. You can always interrupt us. We don't mind. All right. So the next part, starting with 24, and it's not usually 24. It's just 24 on this. Is you see trust deed. Okay, so that means a loan. Now, a couple of the things that I look for, and I would look for if I was in your shoes, is if we go all the way back to Schedule A. Remember, the owner's policy should be in the amount of the purchase price, which is $800,000. Oh, yes. You're already seeing it. What are you seeing here?
That the loan was 800,000, dated in 2016.
There's
How much of that loan's actually been paid off? How much equity is there really to cover all those delinquent
taxes. Well, I love it.
Oh, ding,
You're
ding.
scratching the surface from 1 to 24. Wait till we get to 25, right?
Oh,
But it's good.
please, judgment.
So as an agent, you're looking at it, you go, okay, we already have a whole bunch, on the listing side especially, okay. When I sat down with you, you said you owned it free and clear. I told you we could sell for 800. We got it under contract for 800. Now we have a bunch of taxes. Okay, well, okay, so we'll pull out closing costs and taxes. There's still a big chunk of money. Then you get this, you go, wait a minute, you said you owned it free and clear. There's a loan that's only a couple of years old for 800. Are we upside down? That's my first question. I know that's where you're going. Wait, are we upside down? Is this even a deal that's going to go through? That's something to consider on both sides, right? If you're on the buyer side, on the seller side, you're going, well, Houston, we have a problem. Are you ready to bring cash to close, right? That's my immediate thought. Yeah. On the buyer side, I'm going, Houston, we have a problem. Is the seller ready to bring cash to close? What's going on here? And is this a deal my buyer can rely on? Like something's going to have to happen here. Okay.
I have
So-
a quick optimistic view on this.
Yeah, let's
though.
hear your optimistic view.
So in this case, not the truth, but sometimes there will be an old trustee still on the property. So here you'll see listed who the loan is with and who is the person paying the loan. So if it doesn't match your seller, it might be an old loan and title can clear it off. This is not the case, but there's an optimistic viewpoint on that.
That is true.
So title can clear off old trustees and we just take care of it.
Everybody breathe.
Yes.
Yeah, breathe,
Because
okay.
right now it's about to get really
Red flag though, red flag.
Red flag.
Questions to be
Yeah.
asked. Ask questions.
The rest of this would be very stressful, so we just try to do something else.
Yeah, so we're 224,
Yes.
we're only 3 pages in of 9, so let's see what happens next.
Yeah.
Okay, so now there's a second trustee for 166, 2016. There's another trustee, right? Yeah, we're going, oh boy, how? Start looking, so it's a great question. I'll teach you how I speculate on this stuff. So if we look at number 25, we go, okay, 800 through a more traditional lender. How do they get more? Well, look, the beneficiary, who's the lender, right? If you remember in deeds of trust, you don't have borrowers and lenders, you have beneficiaries for the lender, you have trustor, who's the trustor is the borrower, and then the trustee is the middle person who, wrote up the documents. Beneficiary, what assets? Okay, so that's a private. So some private invest, probably hard money, right? Give them an extra 166. I see that. I see private names. If it's not like
Wells
Fargo or something, I'm going high end for the payouts can probably be a lot more than that. So you've got this. You've got an all inclusive. If you remember, all inclusive is like a seller finance type thing. You've got that situation going on. They won't even tell you the amount of that. There's this construction deed of trust. So then we borrowed money to get the concrete for 91,000. Deeds of trust. So deeds of trust, again, that means loans. We borrowed money. We're gonna keep going. Okay. So deeds of trust are pretty straightforward. Now you have liens, right? So liens are rights against the property that are granted by judgment, by contract, or by statute. Okay, and in this case, when you see construction liens, that's something that's granted by statute, not that you care. A lien's a lien when we're talking to our buyers. What does that mean? Somebody owes money and the property is securing that money. Now, if you look at 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, those are all construction liens. So now I'm positive these guys are upside down.
Optimistic point again.
No. I'm out. That's right. Don't call me. Call her. Yes, baby.
So, because these do pop up still on my normal residential properties, like we said, we're showing you the worst case. Again, I can call the person who's holding the lien, and it could be paid off, and they just never did a release. So don't be ask the questions and be on alert, but don't go crazy until escrow can give you that.
Get more information, but
Yes.
you can be cautiously optimistic. But I would let the client know, hey, there, we may have a
Maybe
problem
not.
when we do some
Maybe
digging.
not in this
right?
one, but.
So there's a couple of things that I skipped over. Liz pendens. Now, if again, let's go back to, that's of course lawyer speak. It's Latin. Let's go back to real estate school because I remember that's the first time I ever heard the words Liz pendens means pending litigation. Okay. And what that means, if it's like these are displayed right under a notice of lien for construction, is that's a foreclosure. You have to sue to foreclose a construction lien. You have to file a lawsuit. If you file a lawsuit, then you have pending litigation to foreclose the house to get your money, and that's why there's a Liz pendens. Okay, so now we know there's a bunch of. I look at that and go, I appreciate the optimism, but why would they start foreclosing? Right? So there's a bunch of litigation. Now let's go down. So we've had fun with liens. Let's go down to 38. 38 is a notice of noncompliance or certificate of noncompliance. I told you, we got you the perfect. Everything's wrong, so you'll be expert. So a certificate of noncompliance can be recorded by a city or an HOA. And what it means is that there's something, in this case, it talks about zoning specific, there's zoning violations, right? Now your buyer's on notice that if they buy this property, the city may come to them and say, fix the zoning violation. For me, when I'm looking at this, if I'm sitting with my buyer, I'm going to say, hey, we need to ask some more questions about what the violations are, and then get the seller to agree to fix that before we buy it or discount. We got to do something. I look at a notice of noncompliance the same way I would as a bad issue on an inspection report, right? You're not going to go, oh yeah, the water main's leaking. That's okay. We'll just pay 800. We're good. No, you're going to try to either get the seller to fix it or you're going to get concessions on the price or something to make up for that. Same thing here. So if you see a notice of noncompliance, you need to ask questions, figure out what it is, figure out what it's going to cost to remedy, go back to the seller and try to work something out.
Oh, sorry. So with like liens, they carry on when you sell the property, right?
You cannot sell property until lien is cleared.
Okay, so it's the seller's responsibility.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why he's saying like to pay attention to the price
Mhm.
and everything required. Because like in this one, they're gonna have to bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually sell the property.
Yeah.
So liens have to be paid. So if your seller's like, well, I'm disputing it. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to pay it and then
Yeah.
dispute it later. So yeah, those have to be cleared and paid in full. Also in regards to non-compliance, so in residential, I've seen recently I had one was non-compliance because they didn't get building permits to place temporary walls around a carport. So in that case, I called the city. A bunch of phone calls later, figured out how to fix it. The seller was able to fix it. We got title got it cleared, or I got it cleared within 12 hours of finding out about the non-compliance. So there are things that can be cleared and taken care of that don't cost me anything. It's just a matter if your seller is willing to put in that effort. So like my seller's like, I know exactly what it's for. I'll take care of it. Like, okay. I've been at this for like 7 years. Like, why don't you do it then? But so just ask title, they can pull the information, make phone calls, and get all that to you guys.
All right. The next part is judgments, right? So these are judgments. So I mentioned liens. You have statutory liens like mechanics liens, construction liens. You have liens by contract, and then you have liens that are authorized by the court. And these would be judgment liens. So these are all things. Again, this just goes to what is the escrow officer looking at having to pay off? What's the CD going to look like when I show it to my seller? Are they going to get money or give money to sell, right? And the buyer side is the seller ends up giving money. Are they actually going to sell, right? And so these are all things. There's more liens. I mean, this is a mess. More liens, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, it's a mess. Any questions on Schedule B2 or some of the issues you'll see?
One thing to keep in mind, this one, surprisingly doesn't have one. Federal tax liens. It takes at least 14 days for title to obtain a payoff from the IRS. So if your seller knows they have a federal tax lien, know that you can't do, that's not going to be probably the best case for a short close. So those federal liens are, like I said, at least 14 days. It typically ends in the client having to wait 4 hours on the phone to talk to somebody to get a payoff. State tax liens are simple. They're like 48 hours to 8 hours to get from the state. So,
But don't you have to have an appraisal done in order to get the state tax lien removed? I'm just thinking.
Not that I
Ever had
know
an
of.
appraisal?
no, so the state tax lien, because that could be.
Well, I'm talking about a short sale.
okay.
It was a short sale during the recession.
Oh,
Had a contract that represented the seller, had the buyer. There were a lot of judgments and there was a state tax lien.
yeah.
And we couldn't sell the house until all the judgments and the liens were removed. But this is a short sale, so it's upside down,
Yeah.
so.
So in
Anyway,
that, in that case,
ended up
where you're
with-
asking the state to release a lien,
Release.
then yeah, that would be one of their conditions,
Yeah.
is looking at, because the government, we love the government and the government loves us a lot. But the government wants their money. They want to make sure that that buyer's not walking away with 1 penny if they're going to release a tax lien fee.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a lot of like, the title would have to show the proceeds, all of that kind of stuff. So, and with bankruptcy. So if your seller is like, well, I started the bankruptcy process, they have to get the okay from the court. They have to either get a release of the bankruptcy, which could take weeks. Or right now we have a filing transaction that had already been approved for bankruptcy, but they're trying to get it dismissed and removed, and their court date keeps getting pushed over and over and over again. So these are all things when you're talking to your seller, when you're listing the home, okay, where are you at? Are you on your payments? Are you behind your payments? Did you file for a bankruptcy? Like what's going on? Really understand that financial situation because that will affect, the whole process of the transaction. So,
All right.
yeah.
So here are the top 10 common title issues. This is a list that was produced by First American Title and Fidelity. Fidelity owns a whole bunch of other title companies. And these are the top 10 things that they're getting claims on, that they're having to defend or pay out. So number one is errors in the public records. So, we get that title report, turns out there was an error, something was misreported, but it's really supposed to be there, right? That's something that would, so we go back to, why would an owner want this? It's to protect against that. And that does happen. The county recorders try to be very careful because they know they're the custodians of all the property records, but mistakes are made, right? Mistakes are made. Unknown liens. So, we looked at mechanics liens. There could be HOA liens, just for example, like a mechanics lien attaches to the property. So that's one of the pieces of liens, is that at some point there's some legal mechanism that makes it attached to the property. There are certain kinds of liens that can attach, but don't have to be recorded for some period of time. So that means you get the title report. If it's attached, but it's not there, you don't know it. And then all of a sudden it shows up after the title's transferred, right? So this would protect against that. Condos, HOAs, mechanics lien or construction liens, those are all examples of liens that can attach. Illegal deeds, somebody signs a name. This goes in hand with forgeries and a false impersonation of previous owners. They all sound like the same thing, but they're all a little bit different, right? But the easiest example to help illustrate something that would go in that line is, somebody's out forging.
Yeah.
And that happens.
Yeah. So Kim, our CEO, had told me a story about this. A lady lived in a different state and she had 10 rental properties, let's say. I don't remember the exact amount. Somebody forged her name, transferred all the titles to them, the con artist, let's call them, and then took loans out on all the properties. So then when the seller went to go sell their investments, she was out of luck.
It was like $56 million out of luck.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Right,
so that unfortunately happens. I would just say let's keep on top of that.
Missing deeds, that was the example I gave at the first of the class, where heirs go to sell a mom's house and find out There was no deed, and now what do we do? And mom really supposed to own it. So missing deeds, undiscovered encumbrances, and unknown easements. These are very, very similar in nature. Like I'll give you the example. I think we've all heard the term prescriptive easement. And what that basically means is that for a long period of time, like 20, 21 years, people have been walking this path across your property to get somewhere, right? And they've done it without your permission, and they've done it, openly, so you could see them walking across your property. They've done it, they've done all the things to tick the box for prescriptive easement. Well, prescriptive easement doesn't require you to record it an easement. It's not going to show up on the title. What happens is the day you go out to build a fence to keep these people off your lawn, they go, hold on, for 21 years, we've been walking across your lawn. And they can go to court, and the court can go, yeah, they have an easement, right? That doesn't show up on title. And so these are things that will pop up, the title insurers are going, okay, we got to defend against that. We have undiscovered will, right? So things go through, and then all of a sudden the will's there. And now we've got the law wants to give people their wishes after death, right? That's why we have wills and have trusts, because the law wants you to be able to say, this is what I want. So, sometimes they don't know where the will is. They don't know if there was will. When I worked with heirs, when it came to title stuff, that was my first question. Is there a will? I know there's not a trust. There might be a trust, but it doesn't matter what the trust says because it's not the name of the trustee, right? So is there a will? It was very rare that people go, oh yeah, there is a will. If there's a will, they're not calling me. So, people don't know if there's a will. And so there may be an issue where suddenly we're working through something, and all of a sudden there's the will, and now it's part of the probate estate. So, and then the last thing that we hit out were the boundary and survey disputes. I've told you, as we look out across Salt Lake Valley, there are a lot. In fact, when I look at property, I assume the boundary line is not where the fence is. It's the same reason buyers don't get surveys when they buy. Fence builders don't pay for surveys. The owners they don't like to pay for surveys for whatever reason, right? You get where there's a strong Home Depot culture or home improvement where we can do it. I watched HGTV. They built this lovely fence out of reclaimed pallets. So I'm going to go to Home Depot. I'm going to buy some 4x4 posts, a couple bags of concrete. I'm going to do it myself. And where's the boundary line? It's about right here, because that's about what we've lived up to. My kids never kicked the soccer ball on this side of that. So, and I know my sprinklers are right here. The sprinkler guys did not get a survey when they put the sprinkler on. That's not how it works, right? And so this happens frequently. Now, is it on? Is it off? It's off. It's going to be off. It'd be dumb luck if it was spot on the boundary line when you built your own fence. And you make it, well, Sam, I never go to a blank area and go, I'm building my fence right here. I always just tear out the old fence and put in the new fence. But was that first fence ever surveyed, right? It's pretty rare that happens.
How much do surveys actually cost?
It depends. They can be, yeah, they're right around 1,000. They can go up to 2,000 depending on how many. But to have someone come out and mark corners, it's usually around 1,200, like 1,000 to 1,200 to have them just mark the corners of the lot. Yeah. So anyway, this happens all the time. In fact, I want to show you an example. So this is a piece of a survey, right? You have the X and the line. That was where the fence was. 27 feet away from where the boundary line was, right? So if you own the property on the side of the thick black line, you love this arrangement because you got 27 extra feet because you're living up to that fence line. If you're on the other side, you're going, wait, I want my 27 feet back. We need to move that wire fence. There are some legal theories that say after a long time, 21 years, if you were living up to that fence line is now your boundary line. Okay. And so this can become an issue. I've used this issue in favor of developer clients that I had, where they were looking, they actually had a developer client who was trying to get subdivision built. And when we looked at the survey that looked a lot like this one, might have been this one, but when we looked at this, we said, hey, look, if we can actually make a legal claim on that 27 feet, you're going to be able to build 2 more houses.
Yeah, because of the easement requirements and stuff. Building.
Yes, and those 2 houses turned them from this much from a little profit to a lot of profit, right? I was a hero, and we were able to pull that off. So it happens. Now, again, I said every house I've personally lived in or personally owned and lived in has had boundary issues, and I'm not making good friends out of my neighbors, not because I'm going, hey, I want my 27 feet back. It's really because all of a sudden, all the neighbors realize all of our fences are off, because when they mark my fence, sometimes they have to mark others to figure out where it all is, right? So where the surveyed line is, so the bold line is what we call the surveyed line against the fence line. Here's an example. This is up in Jeremy Ranch. If you can read the red, it says Jeremy Ranch. I want you guys to look at a couple of these houses at the top of the screen. Little problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one near Cove Drive on the, what is that? I gotta turn around. The left side of the screen where the boundary line cuts the house in half. If you look over by where there's red and yellow, almost every house has a problem.
So my parents own a lot in Wanship that's like that
Yeah.
Gorgoza Drive,
Uh-huh.
where their property line goes across the road, the dirt road. But the dirt road has been there for 40, 30, 40,
Like this one
45,
right here.
50 years.
So they'll claim easement,
And
right?
it goes, and their property goes onto the other side of the road where that property owner has built a fence. So technically,
They
his
own,
fence is on my
it's on your parents'
property.
property.
As well as the road, a section of the
And
road.
so I love that you brought that up. So comment on roads. In modern subdivision planning, the roads will be identified on the map as separate property from any of the neighboring properties. And it will be, yeah, like right on the saddleback. It's separate property from anybody else, and it's dedicated. Not, they call it dedication if you're giving it to the government, but if we're giving it to each other, it's a deed. Same thing. It's dedicated to the city or the county or the state, just whoever is going to own that road. In some of the older subdivisions, like what we're looking at, or maybe like what your parents is up in Wanship, there's an easement or right of way for the road, but it's actually sitting on land that somebody owns. It's not dedicated to the city. Was it me and you or me and Caitlin? The other day down at North Star, because I am their title officer, I have a lot of hats. I don't know. We had an agent had us look at a piece of land and said, hey, you're telling me that this land is 3/10 of an acre. It's not 3/10 of an acre. It's a lot smaller than that. As we pulled it up, it was 3/10 of an acre. There was just a residential road that took up a big chunk, like the first 50 feet of this. So it felt like maybe 2/10 of an acre, but they actually were buying 3/10 of an acre because they were buying the land. They're buying the land where the road was, but they don't, you can't go fence in the road and play because there's a right of way there, right? So sometimes you'll see a piece of property, you'll see it's maybe in an older subdivision or a rural area where it was probably platted out prior to this concept of dedicating the roads to the city and having them be separate pieces of land where you actually, like on Gorgoza, where you own. You're going to be buying the land where it sits. You're going to be buying 3/10 of an acre of something, but really only be able to use 2/10 of that acre. If that makes sense.
In a situation like this, do they ever go and correct it?
It's a fantastic question. So as an attorney, I represented right where Hidden Cove is. I represented that homeowner. They were referred to me by the Summit County attorney. And the Summit County attorney had seen there was a big mess, and they kind of went, I don't know what to do. and they told them to come talk to me. We corrected that lot where, like I said, where it says Hidden Cove, we corrected that and corrected the one on the corner that's just below that. But we didn't correct any of these others because attorneys are greedy, selfish people, and they don't work for other people who don't pay them. And so we corrected the ones we got paid to correct and didn't do them. At some point in the future, if you get a call from the person that lives on the corner of Gorgoza and Saddleback, you're gonna go, oh, I was in that PR class, yikes. Maybe somebody else will take the listing because it's gonna be years of problem for me to work out. But there are a lot of these situations where this happens. There are legal theories, and we could be here all day talking about those that help shift boundary lines if there are issues.
I know the legal.
But it depends on time.
Here.
Yeah.
It's called just look the other way.
Yeah, just don't buy in this subdivision. I didn't say
Will that have any effect on like insurance? Like, because technically your property's in the street or something, can somebody sue you then?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The insurance you're thinking of as liability insurance,
Just
it's probably a
liability,
property owner's
right.
policy, right? No, because you wouldn't be liable for what's happening on somebody else's right of way.
Like they're technically still on your property. Like
On your
literally it's not in the
property.
street,
Yeah,
but-
let's say somebody's driving down and they're intoxicated and they hit a tree or something, and then or it's icy and it slides and they slide off and they go, well, that was your responsibility. With the right of way, like I mentioned earlier, with easements and right of way, you're giving away a piece of the property rights.
Right.
And that piece, with that piece would go.
But even if it's
to
on, let's say it's
liability.
on the road, but like say it's on, like technically that goes in their neighbor's yard. So if their neighbor's kid
Oh, yeah, so like
fell
right
in the
here?
yard and
Buy
hurt
a
themselves,
dog.
did they sue you?
So if I'm the guy on Gorgoza
Right.
where my front yard actually belongs to the guy across the street, that's where I want to put my trampoline. So that when kids break their
Right.
legs, it's not mine, it's theirs, right? That would be a miracle. Man, there's so much to say about personal injury attorneys right now, bursting at the seams. That would be a miracle if a personal injury attorney might look at title records and like, hey, look at that. You can see the guy across the street. Amazing, amazing.
True.
But, if they did, you would trigger everybody's liability insurances. And then what's fun is there's this whole legal process that happens out of view of us, the ordinary consumer, between insurance companies where they arbitrate and figure out liabilities and pay each other back and forth.
Yeah.
It's called subrogation.
The
Yeah.
attorneys for Jeremy Ranch or the city or whatever should go in and fix this.
All
problem.
right.
I mean,
Somebody's got, this is a mess.
It's
What's
purple.
really
that's
interesting,
absolutely crazy.
if I were to zoom back, I-80 is over, it's off the screen to the left. Okay, I-80 is over here. That's even off. It's so
Good.
like the federal government's highway is off. So,
No, it was, somebody
This
was
was a
really
mess.
into their morning coffee. I just
I
went,
don't know.
here, we're good.
If this is a newer development, would you be able to get some sort of retribution from the developers?
Developer? Yeah, so
Based on,
We're clearly
obviously
looking at-
based on the contract that you bought and what is said. in it, you know.
that's the answer is yes. And let me explain why. And this is an older area, right? You can kind of see that Saddleback is where newer, I don't know how newer is, but this is kind of a little bit more rural. There are brand new subdivisions. Well, not brand new. So we talked about the Great Recession.
Yes.
Just prior to the Great Recession, there was a building boom like nobody's business. I mean, building development boom. And cities were not being that cautious. They were kind of rubber stamping stuff, collecting their fees and getting developers pushed back out the door to support the speed of the building boom. And there were all kinds of mistakes like this made. So if you go back to subdivisions built between say like 2002 and 2008, 2009, when everybody lost everything and went out of business, there's a bunch of those that were built that have errors like this. In fact, there's one not too far from where we are at Union Park, where it's as bad as this house that split in half. Okay, so the question was, can you go back to the developer? So when that owner bought that house, they were given a warranty deed. Now, a warranty deed has covenants, and the covenants, some of the covenants, one of the covenants is the covenant to quiet enjoyment. Okay, so that's one of the warranties. I call them covenants, some people call them warranties, right? So one of the, and that's the seller guaranteeing the buyer that they will have quiet enjoyment. And quiet enjoyment's a legal concept that the words don't actually mean what they mean, right? We think of quiet enjoyment, and I have a lot of people call me and go, quiet enjoyment, that means my neighbor can't turn up their stereo real loud at 2 a.m. That's not what it means. Quiet enjoyment means that you will be able to use what you bought without anybody coming and disturbing you, in the sense that they're saying, no, I own what you think you bought, okay? So in that case, if the next door neighbor, and I know about the subdivision because I was hired because somebody was saying, I now own your land. That case, they would go back to the seller, who would be the builder or the developer, whoever, and say, hey, there's been a breach of my quiet enjoyment, meaning somebody has now come and said, I own what you think you own or what you bought, right? And then it goes back to a mistake that was made. And there's all kinds of finger pointing and fun that goes on. And then my kids get to go to college. It's fantastic. But
if the developer went bankrupt and went out of business,
then it's really tough. And then you've got to look at it and try to resolve it with neighbors. Now, like in that situation I'm talking about, yes, the neighbor who is making claim against their next door neighbor's property also had an issue just on the other side of their house, because everybody's was off, right? And so in the end, reason prevailed, miraculously. Reason prevailed, and after my kids got college paid for, but everybody was able to do boundary line agreements and shift everything to what it would have, should have, could have been.
Right.
So, yeah. Well, that was fun.
Yeah. So how do you get access to something like this map if you've got a buyer that's buying a multi-million-dollar home, or even just a home that they're looking to retire in and die in?
Yeah.
They just want to have that quiet enjoyment.
They
And
wanna
you're
know,
like,
like
oh my
the
gosh,
same.
I can't guarantee you
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, that'd be me.
Yeah, but
Okay. You can give us those maps.
technology, you can lay the plat map right over
Yes.
the Google.
And
map.
this came, this actually is
I
a
can
screenshot of what's known as a GIS map, which is available on any county government's website. You can Google, let's say that client's looking for something in Salt Lake County, you can Google Salt Lake County GIS map, and that's where this is. Now, some of these, this happens to be right on because we did have a surveyor and say it's right on, but some of them are off a little bit, but it gives you a sense. And you could look at that and say, hey, it's worth $1,200 or whatever to get the corners marked to verify that your house isn't cut in half.
I'm gonna go check my house. That's the
You should. You should. Let's see if I have my picture. Oh, here's the arrows. I talked about everything with the arrows,
Oh,
with all the messes. All right. Any questions? Yes.
Okay, my question is, if I refinance my house, then I get a new lender's title policy as part of that closing.
Yes.
Okay, my owner's policy, however, that when I purchased the house 17 years ago, is supposed to still be in place.
Yes.
That title company, because of in Utah, split closing, was probably selected by the builder. So it was a new home or by the seller, right? Okay. I'm not sure I can find a copy of the title policy, and if I did find a copy of the title policy, what would happen if that title company has since gone out of business?
So thankfully, the underwriters are typically larger companies. So it's typically going to be Stewart Title, First American, Fidelity.
Westcor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Old Republic.
Old Republic. So they're typically going to be the larger companies. So that's a benefit. So even if if the escrow company went out of business, you would still have the insurance. In regards to like if ATGF went out of business, I don't know.
Yeah, so underwriters are regulated by the State Department of Insurance, and they are supposed to have reserves and other things in place. If they go out of business, my recommendation is contact the Department of Insurance and say, okay, I had a title policy underwritten by, she just said ATGF, which is Attorney Titles Guarantee Fund. Of course, with a name like that, how could they stay in business? And they didn't. You could call it, say, I had a policy and make your claim. And they do have, so the government highly regulating these companies they do make provision for what happens if they go out. There's a whole process if they go out of business. So my recommendation, my recommendation is if you need to. But a lot of these are
If I need to make a claim.
only if you need to make a
Right.
claim.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of these are in very strong financial space. Been
That's
around
why
a long
we
time.
use First American at North Stars because they're very established. And they have a big reserve, you know, so.
Huge, like billions.
Yeah.
huge.
So I say, you know, you pay, that's another thing too, like when you're looking at your shopping tile companies and say, oh, we use this underwriter if you're wanting to cut your fees, keep that in mind. Because then most likely we're using a mom and pop, smaller title company, you know, underwriter, who's not gonna have a large reserve as Fidelity or First American. So you pay for what you get, just like you would in car insurance. Higher you get, the more coverage you get, more liability if you crash your car. It's like it's that kind of thing. So,
I mean, where can somebody go to find out where these underwriters, how they're rated? Isn't there ratings?
There is a rating and I'm trying to think where to go.
you know,
Best. It's called Bests. Google Bests. Insurance grades or something like that. But they grade them like A, AAA, B plus, C minus. You know, Sam's high school grades, D's.
We know that's a lie.
yeah, right?
I would like to think that was a lie. My wife would like to think that was a lie. My kids know the truth. Trust me.
Yeah,
They
we
know.
all know the truth.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yes.